So we go into the customer and we get all of their information, obviously their mailing address, contact name, email address, phone number, fax, and then ship to. For instance, if a customer of mine that's Gojo may have multiple ship to locations. In other words, we ship to Akron, we ship to Cuyahoga Falls, we'll ship to Enterprise Packaging. So it's very important to find out, are there other ship tos? The other thing while you're there is to find out, do they have other plants in other locations? In other words, Gojo may have a plant in Indiana. Who is that contact? Who can I talk to? Again, you're kind of building your book of business off of the first appointment, or building future opportunities off of the first appointment. And then in regards to hardwood and softwood, softwood is typically based on regions. So softwood regions would be like California, down south, Canada. That's where softwood is prevalent. Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Pennsylvania are all hardwood regions where the forest is all typically hardwood trees that we harvest. When we get into heat treat is for export only typically, meaning anything leaving the United States going into another country needs to be heat treated. There is a stamp that's placed on the outside of each stringer, one on each side. It's a paperless transaction, and the number is all they need to have when it goes through customs. It can be tracked back to the United States and us, basically. If a company heat treats everything, it's typically because they do not want to make a mistake, meaning if a pallet ended up overseas that was not heat treated with product on it, it would have to be incinerated, and that could be very costly. The product is lost, the pallet is lost, everything on that is typically lost. They treat it as if it's an infectious disease. I mean, it's terrible. So some companies will heat treat everything just so that that mistake isn't made, especially if 80% of their business is overseas or shipping out of the country. Methyl bromide, there was a Tylenol scare 15 years ago where a company was heat treating pallets, or treating pallets for export with methyl bromide, which is a potent chemical, and it got into the Tylenol. It what do you want to call that? It made the Tylenol
like seeped into it?
Yes. So they had to pull everything off the shelf. They had a major recall. So everybody thinks methyl bromide today is a no-no, and very few people use it today. So heat treat's the big thing. But if you hear the word methyl bromide, you'll know what it is. It's a chemical. They put the bombs in the trailers with the pallets in it, and the trailer's closed, and it's a chemical that's very strong. Don't see it very much today. Green just simply means the lumber's fresh, cut, and green. It still has moisture in it. Air dry means just what it says. You let the lumber sit, air dry, the moisture kind of comes out of it. I would say we could just leave heat treat on here. I don't really think this needs to be on here anymore. Okay. Just the market's changed so much over the years. Quality, what does this mean? Poor, average, excellent. You will go into some companies, pharmaceutical for instance, where everything is absolutely gorgeous. 9 times out of 10, it's softwood, because softwood is your building material. It's very smooth. It's called S4S, which means smooth on all 4 sides. It's not as grainy. It's not as splintery. So when you walk in and you see a pallet, you're going to be like, oh wow, that looks like furniture. Even hardwood can have some characteristics where it's beautiful, but I think this is really important because you're marrying the customer to the supplier when you're brokering, especially here when you're not using your own mills. I mean, especially somewhere else where you don't have your own mills. So it's very important to know, is that quality excellent? Is it average, or is it poor? In other words, I've got a guy who's very cost effective, very, very competitive, but his quality may be When I go into this customer and I see what they're getting, I want to give them that or better. I don't want to go down. So I think that's really important. Pictures also, if they'll let you take pictures, I always suggest the reps shoot a quick picture of the side view and the front view in case you forget something. You can always go back and say, oh no, it had 7 boards on top, I wrote down 6, or whatever the case may be. Oh, I missed the heat treat stamp. Well, now you know if you got a side view picture and a front view picture, you're not going to miss anything as far as boards or anything. The next box here just means, did they give it to me over the phone? Was it verbal? Did they send specifications, or did I go out and measure? Again, anytime there's a new measure, because 9 times out of 10 the specs are wrong. If they won't let you visit and you just got the specs and you quoted it and you're dollar high, again, it's because you're not quoting apples to apples. Receiving hours, dock appointment. A lot of times companies will receive their pallets 6 to 2 or 6 to 3 or 7 to 3 or 8 to 3. They want to go home. They want the truck to come in and they know it's going to take an hour or 2 to unload it. So you want to make sure you know what their receiving hours are. I always put an hour earlier. Just if they say 7 to 3, I always say 7 to 2, because if the driver's running late, I'm still meeting the mark. Dock appointment, that means Gojo, for instance, again, they take 10 truckloads a week. They have to have a dock appointment with a number for every delivery and a time. So if you miss your dock appointment, you're out of luck, basically. They have so many trucks coming in and out with supplies and et cetera, that everything has to be done by the book. Some companies don't care as long as you're in between 7 and 3, but this is important to know as well. Do we need a dock appointment? And that's something Inside usually sets up on their end when they're scheduling and doing the paperwork. Okay, next, the very first digit here is your stringer length. So if we measure the pallet right now, and we measure the stringer, that would be your very first number. Let's just say we're doing a 48/40 right now. 48 is your stringer, and your deck board going the width-wise is 40. So 48 by 40. This means single-faced. That means it has no bottom boards. Rarely do you see that, but you do. This means double-faced. Means it has top and bottom boards. So you'd circle whether it's single-faced or double-faced, 2-way or 4-way. That means there's a notch in the stringer, makes it 4-way. You can enter all 4 sides. 2-way means you can only enter front and back. So you'd circle whether it's 2-way or 4-way. Reversible means if you flip that pallet over, it's exactly the same on both sides. So the top looks like the bottom. You can use it either way. Other might be block, could be specialty, could be whatever you need to make a note on does not fit this category, or just maybe a special note of some sort, whatever you want to put there. Bill of materials. So after we've got the 48 by 40 up here, the next thing we're going to measure is the stringers. How many stringers? Let's just say there's 3. The thickness, so that's your width of your stringer, by the height of your stringer, by the length. So you've got thickness, right? Height by length. That's what these are. Again, maybe you have a situation where the 2 inner stringers are shorter than the 2 outer stringers. Maybe they're inset slightly. That's where you would say, 2 of the stringers are X, Y, and Z, but there's 1 stringer that's whatever, and then I'd make a note where that is. And again, that's where the picture comes in, because you'll remember when you get back, why I have an extra stringer there. So maybe that stringer is, instead of it being 48, maybe it's 46, or maybe it's skinnier. Maybe it's only 1 inch versus 1 1/4 inch. That's where you'd make that note there. Top deck, same thing. Thickness, so if it's 1/2 inch, the width, 3.5 or 5.5, that's your standard cuts. Typically there's nothing other than those. By length, 40. So you've got thickness, 1/2 inch, by 3.5 or 5.5, by length, 40. Let's just say your lead boards are 5.5, which is referred to as 6-inch leads, and your inner boards are 3.5. This is where you would say 2 top deck are 1/2 inch by 5.5 by 40. 5 top deck are 1/2 inch by 3.5 by 40. That's why there's 2 lines for your 5.5s and your 3.5s. Same with the bottom. Bottom's the same way, 1/2 inch by 5.5 by 40. And you've got 3 top boards that are 1/2 inch by 3.5 by 40. Other would be, I'm trying to think what an other situation would be with deck boards. Let's just say let's just go back here for a minute. Let's just say that it's a wing pallet. So many different scenarios. If it's a wing pallet, your top or bottom boards would hang over the stringers, so it's no longer flush. It hangs over the stringers. Your bottom boards are going to be, let's call it a single wing right now. I don't want to jump all over too much, but let's just call it a single wing. What a single wing means is your top deck boards hang over the stringers, your bottom deck boards are flush. So your bottom boards are going to be shorter than your top boards because they're flush, and your top boards are going to be longer over the stringers. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So here's where you would make a note of that. I've got 4 on the bottom that are 1/2 inch by 3.5 by 40. You wouldn't be filling out this, you would only be filling out that. Okay? Over here, flush, single wing, double wing. This is what we just talked about. Flush obviously means everything lines up on the ends of the pallet, on the sides of the pallet. There's nothing hanging over. Single wing means the top hangs over the stringers, but the bottom is flush with the stringers. So it literally, I'll show you an example at some point, but that's what that means. Double wing means your stringers are inset and your top boards and your bottom boards line up. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
4-way notch. That's so you can enter all 4 sides like we talked about. We're measuring the notch now. Why are we measuring the notch? Well, because you may have, the way they handle the notch it may be a 60-inch long stringer, and the notch is right in the center of that pallet. So it's important to mimic that because it's the way they handle it. So we would measure, what is the notch? It's located how far from the stringer end. So if we're looking at a stringer right now, and here's your stringer, and your notch is right in the center, we would measure from that center of the notch to the end of that deck board. Let's just say it's 19 inches. We would put 19 inches from the end of the stringer. That's what that means. And where is it located? It's located, this is basically the depth, the height and the length of the stringer. So we would say and notches are more standard today because of the equipment that's used. So this isn't as important because it's kind of standard as this is, but this is basically meaning it's 1.5 inch deep by 6 or 9 inches long, depending on which equipment they're using. And but the location is critical. That's the critical part. The notch, you have a notcher that notches stringer, so it's not as important. Clipped corners, what does that mean? That literally means, if we were to take this piece of paper right here, this is our pallet. This is the top surface of the pallet. Clipped corners means the edge of the pallet is literally clipped off like that. Chamfer lead edges. Chamfer lead edges means the bottom board of the pallet is chamfered so that it's 11/16 to 1 inch is when you'll see this. Very, very thick boards on the bottom, and they rough them up so that the rollers of the equipment can go over them. The lumber's so thick and it has to be built so heavy that the equipment can't go over that board. So they chamfer the lead edges, and you'll see it. It looks like it's rubbed out right where the equipment goes in, and they only do that on the bottom leads on both sides. and then here's chamfer both edges. That would mean both sides. I don't know why it says edges, it's really both sides. Other, any special notes, I can't think of an other really that I would put in there, but there's just any special notes that you want to note there. Stencil, they may want their part number, they may want the number they put on their PO, they may want their company name, they may want the date that it's manufactured. This is very important. If there's a stencil, it's going to be on the stringer on either side or both sides, and it'll either say Unilock 0908, or it'll say return to Unilock, or it'll say part number. So we've marked that and write down exactly what that stencil should look like. Color code simply means they want the 2 center stringers color coded green. So the guys literally take the stack and they take a spray paint can and they go down the 2 center stringers on both sides. Maybe it's one side, maybe it's both sides. This is where we would make that note and also explain what that color code is. This palette is green, the next palette's red, the next one's black, etc., and where that color code is. Stamp, again, I think is your heat treat stamp. There's no other stamping going on other than that. And then there's a little block here for them to do a little sketch. Let's just say that the bottom boards are inset and I needed to make a note of that. Or let's just say the top, this is the top of your palette, the center 2 are butted together right in the middle. I'd want to make a picture or note of that. So here's where you could draw your little sketch of this palette if you needed to make a special note regarding the way that it was built. Again, here's some more note area for whatever you need to remind yourself of that you're seeing at that point. But again, pictures help all of this. Back then, we didn't really take pictures when I first started, so pictures are really helpful. Here's some more, a little area for you to write in whatever you need. Unload, flatbed or box trailer. That just basically means, is it a semi that's closed, or are you unloading in the yard where we don't have docks? Then I'd need a flatbed. Most of your block and paving companies don't have docks. They're out in the middle of a sand yard or out in the middle of, I don't want to say a field, but in a plant where there's no docks. That's when they would want a flatbed. Or their docks are really busy and they've got too many trucks coming in and out and they store their pallets outside in the yard, on in their back parking lot. They need a flatbed because they cannot unload a box from the yard. Side or rear just basically means if it's a box trailer, obviously you're going to unload it from the rear because you can't get to the side. If it's a flatbed, you're going to unload from the side. But it's important if, let's just say it's a 2-way pallet and you can't get into the side, you need to load those pallets so that you can enter them from the side. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
They'll figure it out, but you know what I'm saying? Okay, stack band. This means banding. It can be plastic or steel banding. Some companies will want every 10 pallets banded because of the way they're handling them, but they still want them stacked 20 high. So that would be considered a half stack. A full stack would mean you just put one band all the way through 20 pallets. Sometimes they do front and back just so that the pallets don't shift, especially if they're going far or they have some unloading concerns or they're big safety conscious. They'll maybe stack, or they'll maybe band the last 4 stacks only, or they may band the whole truck, or there may be no banding at all. But this is where you would mark that. Metal, plastic, they don't care either way, full stack or half stack, but they do want banding. Stack height, you want to maximize every load because that makes you more cost effective. It takes down your freight. If you're taking a $300 freight bill over 300 pallets, it's $1 a pallet. If you're taking a $300 freight bill over 600 pallets, it's 50 cents. So you want to maximize your stack height. If the pallet is 1/2 inch or under, you typically can go 21, 22 high. As long as there's no issues with their dock door height from years ago. Some of the dock doors are lower than the standard today. They may have a special stack height, like we can only go 18 high because we have these old dock doors and they don't go high enough, whatever the reason may be. This is where you would mark that down. 20 is always safe to assume, but you want to go 21, 22 if you can. Just it's going to help you in your price at the end of the day. 48 and 53, same thing. You're trying to maximize your freight. Not everybody has 53-foot trailers. The norm is 48, but if we could get a 53, we know we can get 16 on the load versus a 48, we're only going to get 588. So right there's a difference of 30 pallets, but that 30 pallets could be 50 cents. So that's another 50 cents. You're more competitive. And then your center stacking permitted, there's something called pinwheeling the pallets. And that's basically on a 4840 where you can, I'm trying to think of this correctly. So you're 96, I think you're 96 wide. You can put 2 rows side by side, or you can pinwheel them so that it would look like this. That's what pinwheeling means. If you're allowed to pinwheel them, it takes a little longer to unload, but you can get so many more on the truck by pinwheeling them. So center stacking permitted, that's kind of what I think they were trying to get at. Can they be pinwheeled? You know, can we maximize your load? So that's another very important question when you're out there. What is your typical truckload quantity? Is it 588? Can we do 616? Because immediately you're gonna, if you're comparing apples to apples, you're gonna be at least a couple pennies lower getting the 616 versus a 588. We would bring this back to the office, and then the outside sales rep would write who their top suppliers that they wanted to send this to were. I want to send this to our Sugar Creek plant, our Middlefield plant, Aiden at GM, Custom out in Middlefield, and Cross Creek out in Middlefield. I would write all of those down, and I would send this to my inside sales. This is the current process. They would then, and back in the day, retype all of this, you know, in an email or however they want to do it, and they would send it out for pricing. 3-day turnaround was always the max. I like to do things quicker. And then they would send it back with what the cost is for that plant, what the rate is, figuring out the board footage, and how many they're quoting on a truck. Like some will only quote 588, some will quote 600. They're not really trucking it maybe. Some are, some aren't, but this is kind of how they base their pricing. Today what we do, this is great for outside, but we do it all in email so they can cut and paste it onto something instead of retyping everything. So this is a great tool for outside, but then I think the best process is either A, they get their own pricing because they can get it quicker, or B, if they're gonna send it to their inside sales, they do it in an email format where they can just cut and paste it on their form and fax it out. Okay, so basically we used to figure everything in board footage. That's why you see all this board footage here, and I can show you how to do all of that. This would be what we are marking it up. So in other words, let's just say our delivered price from Sugar Creek that we put out there in the first thing, on the first line, let's just say he was at $6.50 and board footage was $1. We know that's 65 cents. I'm just doing this in my head quick because I'm trying to give you an example. Our gross profit, we really want to be, depending on the terms, if it's a 30-day term account, 5% is our bottom line. I like to quote things around 8 and work them back if I need to. If it's very high volume, we'll go as low as a 4, and the terms are good. But once we start getting to like 60 days and 90 days like today, each 30 days costs us a point for carrying the money. So our outside or our inside sales would normally put whatever margin we're used to, I would say at 8%. And they would say, this is based on an 8%. This is what I think you should go in at. Then you have 2 options at this price. You have this guy if you use, just say he's at $6.50. You'll have an 8% with him, but this guy's at $6.70, but even at this price, you have a 5%. So they would write that in down here for us. Today, we kind of do all of that ourselves. It's changed a little bit over the years. Good?